Alright, I'm making this video, one take. I'm making it because I want to talk about what we call self-sabotage, because I've been thinking about the changes I want to make in my life and who I want to become. And, I guess this is a familiar process for myself, like it is for a lot of people when they want to make a transformation. They encounter like this feeling of not knowing what the next steps are, and they might also have attempted multiple times to become a newer version of themselves, and they find themselves engaging in habits, at least I have, habits and behaviors that are contradictory to who they say they are or who they want to become. And it can it can come off in multiple ways, right? It can be, you should be up in the gym 6 a.m. every day, but you get distracted and you go out with friends, or you're up partying. Or it could be on the other end, you really need to just enjoy life, right? But you're too rigid, and you miss out on things, and you can never get into flow state. Like that can still affect like things with work, or careers, relationships, all of that. You can actually be too strict and too rigid, because if you look at like any building, if a building is like too stiff, or the foundation is too stiff, it'll actually become brittle and break down. So it's important to like be firm, and even I would still say rigid in a lot of ways, but you can't be too rigid. But anyways, I'm saying all that to say it doesn't really matter how it manifests. The point is, we can always look back and think about, damn, I wanted to be this version of me. I wanted to do this. I said I was going to do this. I even did so much work for it, but I still engaged in behaviors, or I still led myself down a path to come right back to where I am, or where I have been. And we can call that self-sabotage, because it seems like we're making efforts to sabotage ourselves. But really, from my own reflections and my own experience, I would say it's a little bit more like self-protection, right? It's almost like when we're unfulfilled, of course, and when we feel the pain or the dissatisfaction of our current reality, that's when we want to change. But we're not looking to change the external so much as we're looking to change the person experiencing these circumstances. And that requires transformation. Self-improvement was such like a big industry, and it's still pretty prevalent today. But I think people got kind of tired of seeing the same information regurgitated over and over again. And I think the problem with self-improvement was that it was really just about enhancing what you already are. If you already got some muscle, it doesn't take much to learn to put on more muscle. If you already have a job, you can always find a better paying job and make more money, and that's important. Both of those things are important. Same thing with like sex. If you're already getting laid, you can always get laid even more. And that can be good if you are not getting as much of whatever it is you wanted. But there's going to be a threshold. There's going to be a certain point where like, okay, that's not enough. That's not really what's bringing me that fulfillment, besides just, a certain threshold that I want to meet. And we all got different thresholds. That's all good. But I think something different than self-improvement is just like transformation, and being always willing to evolve and grow. And if you think about like transforming, it's really just changing form. I think that's what trans means. It's like to go across, or to like go from one form to another. And that is a very different process, because in order to change forms, your current form has to be no more. And if you're identified with your current form, it's going to feel kind of like a death. So the problem with calling things self-sabotage is not really understanding what the problem is. The problem is we're so protective of who we believe ourselves to be that, of course, there's going to be a part of us that doesn't want to become the new version, because it doesn't understand what's going on. And unfortunately, that's a hard part of being human. But I also think it's like the most beautiful and important part, is that we can rise above our instincts, because that's our instincts trying to protect us from what we believe to be danger. But the only way around it is to become more conscious and be more centered within ourselves, to realize like, hey, I'm becoming a new version of me that's very uncomfortable. And there's going to be stumbling blocks, there's going to be things that I realize I did, and then I'm like, okay, that's what that was. Let me not do that again. Let me understand where that's coming from, so I'm not going down the same path, and move forward. And so it's never a comfortable process, not only because it feels like a death, but also because you can't really think your way through it, because your thoughts come from your current identity. And if your current identity is the problem, it can't solve it, because it's always going to want to be the one taking credit, right? And that's why I talked about in the last video the importance of silence, because silence is just a way for us to get inspiration and insight from a source much deeper than our current identity. You can call it God or the universe or whatever. But that's why it's so important for every one of us to allow ourselves time each day to just be silent and become quiet. With that, you can start to find the answers. You can be guided by something greater than you. The problem with that, and I've done this multiple times, is once you get the guidance, things start to make sense, and then you start moving again. And then you start to think, oh, it's been you all along. It's been you who's been figuring this stuff out. But it's not been you, it's been something greater. But like our identities, our egos, we want to take credit for everything. And then the cycle begins again. Life is going great for like a year, maybe a few months, maybe a year, maybe 3 years. And then you hit the same thing. You're unsatisfied and you got to figure it out. And by then it feels so foreign, and you're so identified with your new identity, you almost forget the process. But the process to transform will always be a much deeper and more challenging process than anything like self-improvement. It's really about self-destruction and self-creation, and you can't really destroy or create the self. You kind of like take part in it. You kind of like surrender it. You surrender yourself, and that's why all the religions talk about surrender, because you have to be willing to let go of who you currently identify as to become something greater. And we can set our intentions out, but the more honest we are with ourselves, the better we will be at creating the newer version of ourselves. Because if we think about like desire is so deep and innate. It's something that like we can't really point the source to. We can say we have free will, because if I want to pick up this pen, I can pick up the pen. But like, what gave me the desire to pick up the pen? So desire is such a deep thing. And I think the most important thing to have the most fruitful and authentic life is to go, straight for your desires. Don't try and like A to B to C it. If you want something, you should go for it. I know that sounds like not deep or not spiritual, but I think it's like the most truest way. And it's not about being like a pleasure seeker just for pleasure's sake. I think pleasure is oftentimes like a substitute for our truest desires. Our truest desires are to create and like really be engaged in life and do something really fulfilling and meaningful. And when we don't listen to that, when we don't follow that path, then we take, the path of pursuing pleasure or distraction, or even like fooling ourselves and saying like, oh, we're so disciplined just because we're doing something like, working all the time or hitting the gym every day, but that is also really taking the path of pleasure, because we're taking the path of, we're getting the pleasure from feeling like we're doing something because we are, and it's something that society celebrates, having a certain level of discipline with our bodies, with our money. And it's good because, you're planning for the future, you're taking care of yourselves, but it's not the main thing. Your main, like, I don't want to say calling, but the thing that could really propel you and drive you and bring the most fulfillment can oftentimes maybe even be harmful. It might be something that keeps you up for hours and damages your health, or, puts you in harm's way, puts your life in risk. But it's going to be your truest desire. It's going to be a lot more authentic. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoy this video. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment, and just wait for the next one.